We have 3 people coming in.
Wonderful. Good morning, all. We're going to get started in a little bit for our virtual coffee hour regarding the Newport Creek area drainage study. Just a reminder, we're on mute and cameras are not shared at this time. The meeting is being recorded. We're going to give it probably another 4 or 5 minutes or so. So get yourself a fresh coffee if you don't have your coffee in front of you already. And we'll go ahead and get started in a little bit. For those of you joining us, we're going to go ahead and get started in a few minutes for the Newport Creek area drainage study. Again, we're going to wait a few more minutes. It's only just, it's not even 9 o'clock yet. We'll get started shortly. Well, it is 9 o'clock on the nose. I want to say good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is the virtual, because we're doing everything virtual now, coffee hour discussion, just to update neighbors in the area on the Newport Creek area drainage study. This is an information gathering meeting. We're not looking for decisions. We're not looking for any real in-depth discussion. What we are looking at right now is to gather information from the community that lives both on the creek as well as within the drainage area for the Newport Creek creek shed. Before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about rules for discussion. We find that this helps when we're doing everything virtual because we can't see each other's faces. We can't read body language. As a note, all attendees are muted. When we do have discussion after the presentation is completed, please raise your hand and you will be unmuted. We also will be accepting questions or comments within the chat feature. So please make sure that if you have something, just jot the chat down. And we do have someone moderating behind the scenes who will be able to track that and make sure that comments are included. Your screen share is off and your video camera is also off. If you would like to be on camera, if you will, for the purposes of the group discussion at the end, please feel free to turn your camera on, but we're not going to be requiring that. One thing we will, though, have at the end of the discussion is a map for discussion purposes, in case someone kind of wants to ask some detailed questions or maybe make some comments, so we can keep track of exactly where those points of concern are. Another note, please remember this meeting is being recorded, and this entire meeting will be available on the city's project website, which I will be presenting at the end of the month. And last and most certainly least, please be respectful of others' time and statements. Again, because we are in a virtual setting, we kind of can't read body language, we can't see smiling faces. So just kind of think about that as we continue with the group discussion. So I'd like to start with the introduction of the project team. The voice you're hearing is myself, Jennifer Lawson. I am the city's water quality manager in the systems planning unit, and that's the public services area. I also have Heather Seyfarth with us today in the systems planning unit. She is the community engagement specialist on this project. Including the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commissioner's Office. Harry Sheehan, who is the Deputy Water Resources Commissioner, is a part of our team. And I think I actually just saw Evan Pratt, our Water Resource Commissioner, join the meeting as well. And then I have two consultants that are working for us from our engineering company, Hubelroth and Clark. We have Lynn Seymour as the project lead and Stephanie Petrello as the project analyst. So the big question, why are we here? Why is the city doing a creek shed study, a drainage study on the Newport Creek area? There are neighbors that in the downstream area are experiencing flooding and extreme flows within this creek shed. We're seeing a lot of stream bank erosion throughout the creek banks. On the right, you see a picture that was actually just taken last week. We do have some pretty severe erosion in areas, and we're losing a lot of sediment into that creek. We're looking for potential water quality improvements because this creek does flow into Barton Pond upstream of the city. We want to make sure that we can capture any opportunities for water quality improvements. And then many of you may remember about 10 or 11 years ago, had a culvert washout at Newport Road, and that was replaced. But we want to make sure that we are continuing to protect that culvert and make sure that those flows coming down the creek can be minimized so we're not impacting the culvert. So what's happening? What are you going to see? What's going on? Our engineering consultant will be doing an evaluation of the creek banks, looking for any opportunities to stabilize stream banks. They will also be evaluating the existing stormwater detention for performance. Many of the neighborhoods in this drainage area were built with stormwater management ponds, detention ponds, retention ponds. This really is an opportunity for us to go make sure that those ponds are still functioning as properly designed. In addition, we also recognize that there were many residences, properties developed without stormwater detention. So we are going to look for some opportunities that would positively affect the entire drainage area. Which leads into my next box. It's evaluation of developed areas for new stormwater detention. If there are new stormwater features that we can include or design and build to address stormwater flows that are entering the creek. And then there will be an evaluation of hydraulics and what we call pinch points in the creek. Where are areas that the culvert crossings might not be large enough, or that would create some sort of damming effect in the creek. Coming out of what the engineering consultant is doing, so really our deliverables, are a few things: recommendations for stream bank stabilization and recommendations for stormwater management opportunities. Those are really the two big things, because that's what we look at as improving both stormwater flows as well as water quality improvements. The key thing to remember, though, is that blue box on the bottom. Any potential projects will be included in the city's capital improvement plan. That doesn't mean that the projects are going to be built next year or even in the next 5 years, because all potential projects will be evaluated across the entire city for stormwater needs. So we're doing drainage studies in this area. We have drainage studies across the entire city. And we have, I believe, almost 60 projects at this time in the stormwater bucket for potential construction for the next several years. So what's happening right now? Many of you may have our engineering consultant out last week walking the creek, doing a creek evaluation. They'll be doing that probably for the next several weeks into the next month or so. It's very weather dependent. As many of you are looking out the window right now, it's pretty darn cold out there, and with snow covering everything, we can't see everything that we need to evaluate. And then our engineering consultant will also be driving in the neighborhoods and evaluating the existing stormwater detention facilities. So the stormwater ponds or ponds that are in the park areas or open space areas within the neighborhoods. And what we do anticipate is that there will be another series of coffee hours similar to this, probably the late spring or so, to present all of the findings and recommendations that will be included in the city's capital improvement plan as we move forward. And that's really all that I have right now. I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to gather information and gather data from those of you who are attending, who live in this area. Maybe your house backs up to the creek. Maybe you are live in the area and you're just kind of curious about what this stormwater Newport Creek discussion was. So with that, Heather, I would ask you to see if there are any comments in the screen, or if anyone would just like to raise their hand. And Heather, if you could moderate and see if anyone has comments or questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can feel free to add questions or comments into the chat function. I don't see any yet, Jen, but people feel free to put something in there, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. And those of you who are on the phone, it's *9 if you wanted to ask a question that way. There's a question coming in about existing retention ponds.
Okay. Paul, what's your question? Yes, please.
Can you just ask?
Okay, thank you. I am president of the Riverwood Homeowners Association, which has, there are 77 homes along the, with Riverwood and Timber Trail. And Newport Creek flows nicely through the, a big part of our neighborhood. And my question has to do, we've been monitoring and watching the 2 of the 5 retention ponds. The neighborhood was built with 5 retention ponds. I would say 3 of them are completely dried up or never seem to have any water in them, which is something we would be interested in finding out why and what the consequence is. But 2 of the 5 have been problematical for a good 5 years in terms of high water, low water, weed growth, clogging, and other things like that. So my question has to do largely with the amount of detail we might get from the study in terms of recommended action on the ponds that have water in them. And the related question as head of the Homeowners Association is staging improvements. Should improvements be recommended?
First of all, Paul, I want to say thank you for taking a proactive approach. I love when I see residents and property owners take an interest in how their detention ponds function. So thank you. What we're looking at for this project specifically is to take what was originally designed. And so if you think back to when the Riverwood neighborhood was designed, those ponds had a very specific design. And we will be reviewing the ponds to make sure that they're basically doing the job that they were supposed to do when they were built. If not, there will be kind of a broad statement to say they are not functioning as they're supposed to. If I recall, and I apologize, I don't remember offhand, these are privately owned ponds. There's probably an easement for flow through in some areas, but it is the property owner's responsibility for maintenance of those ponds. This study will not provide you engineered drawings to fix the ponds or redesign the ponds. There's nothing like that. What the city actually has the authority to do is simply go back to what the original design was. That being said, we do want to work with you hand in hand if there are improvements or changes that the homeowners association would like to make. And hopefully there's definitely going to be some solutions. It sounds like, just from your recollection and your observations, that the ponds aren't working, but we can certainly work with you on what those next steps might be. I hope that helps, Paul.
And he writes, thank you. We have the original design drawings and an engineering study from 5 years ago.
Fantastic. Paul, if you could put your contact information in the chat, I would love to make sure that we have you included on communications in the future. Thanks, Paul. I see your email.
Okay, any other questions? Or any other observations that people have?
Well, we can go ahead and close it up then. I don't want to.
Oh, there's actually another question.
Oh yes,
else, Marita, if you wanted to unmute yourself, you can feel free to ask.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you could supply a map or tell us more about the whole drainage area. It would be helpful to know the scope of what we're talking about. And is this available online? I've tried looking at a couple of maps and they seem to vary, even from where the headwaters are and whether there are 2 or 3 streams. I see you've put up something here on the screen. So could you clarify that a bit and what the whole drainage area is?
Sure. So we use the term Newport Creek in a pretty loose fashion, and I'm going to take a step back. Well, I think we all anecdotally and lovingly call this waterway Newport Creek. It is actually an unnamed tributary to the Huron River. It is jurisdiction of the state of Michigan. It is not owned by the city. It is not owned by the county. The jurisdiction for maintenance falls on basically the property owners that are adjacent to the creek. The blue lines you see here on the map are the 2 larger, if you will, open channel creeks that flow from essentially the Garden Homes neighborhood through the interchange at M14, flowing adjacent to the new Skyline High School, and then back through there's a lot of wonderfully wooded area underneath Newport Road. And there is an enclosed section right here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. There's an enclosed section basically within the neighborhood, and then it does flow underneath the railroad, underneath Huron River Drive out to Barton Pond. The other, so if you could say this is the southern branch is a drainage channel that extends again through neighborhoods and joins with that larger creek and flowing back out to to Barton Pond. The drainage area, and I don't have a map, but it really, I'm going to follow with my mouse very slowly. It extends kind of largely here, and then it cuts very closely into the Garden Homes neighborhood. It cuts just down to here to the Crescents area, and then loops back up, including portions of this neighborhood, and then back through our neighborhood on the east side of Newport Road. There are roughly 750 parcel property owners in the drainage area. And we did send postcards to all 758, if I want to be exact, that are with the drainage area. Kathy, those maps are somewhat available. We don't have a specific map of the Newport Creek drainage area available on the city's website, but that certainly can happen. So thank you for that recommendation. Am I answering your questions, though? I wanted to make sure that I'm answering your question.
Yes, thank you. It's helpful. And I think it would be helpful to moving this project along if you had a visual that shows how broad the impact is and what the watershed really means, because this seems an opportunity to help educate people about that. In my own yard, which is right on Lowell Road, where Newport Creek then goes underground. So I'm sitting right at that area. I watch in the springtime the pattern of movement of water across this property of mine, but from a number of other properties. And it's so obvious as the snow melts partially, and we can see those lines of flow. So I think that helping people understand that it's not just the property owners along the creek, but what the people do with their land well beyond that would be really helpful, along with what Evan Pratt's people are doing with the rain garden program and looking at ways that people can mitigate some of this runoff. So I'm hopeful that we can do some neighborhood education related to that whole watershed area. And
that sounds wonderful.
About this project.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for those recommendations. We'll see what we can include.
Then Kathy Loomis had her hand up. So Kathy, if you want to go ahead and ask a question, and then I'll get back to some of the other questions that are in the chat. Kathy, if you want to go ahead with your question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Yes.
Okay. I've lived, Newport Creek's flowed in front of my house and behind my house since I've lived here since 1963. There was a wonderful pond that there's a dam system that is part of it is still there. When they put in Newport Creek, I believe they took one of the dams out. And I was wondering if the other dam that's still there, is that any plans to remove it? There used to be a pond right down the hill that those dams were part of. And the pond actually is supposed to have a concrete bottom, which I never saw, but it filled in when they built M14. And the pond's no longer there, obviously, it's all creek, but there's still part of a dam there that I think it's part of the natural park that's there now. And I was wondering if there was any plans to take that old dam out.
We can look into it. We usually don't recommend dams on waterways if they're going to be controlled or managed by someone else, to be very honest. But in our consultants review area, we'll identify it and see what records we can find about it.
I don't believe it's doing any harm. It's just been there. It's been there since 1945. It's just a remnant of what used to be a wonderful pond. And I kind of hate to see it go because it's kind of cool, and as long as it's not hurting anything, I'm hoping it stays. But I was wondering if anybody was looking into that. That's all.
We'll include it in our evaluations. Thank you.
And there is a question from Paul that reads, is it possible to estimate how bad the problem is relative to other drainage areas?
Thanks, Paul, for that question. I'm going to give you the scientific answer. No, because we have different drainage areas, different land use types, different acreages that all kind of flow into some of our larger creek areas. Newport Creek is a relatively small drainage shed or creek shed within the city of Ann Arbor. Mallett's Creek, for example, one of the ones you've probably heard about, is actually 44% of the city's land area. So for me to take a comparison to from Newport Creek to Mallett's Creek, it would be a gross overestimation. But what we can do though is take a look at those areas based on the existing land use and compare it to what I would say like an ecological scoring system. I think that I don't want to paint a rosy picture, but I also don't want to paint a horrible picture, if you will. It's very difficult to compare apples to apples when it comes to drainage areas in that fashion.
Okay, and we have another question. I notice a lot of oil from the highway entering the creek, and I'm wondering if there are thoughts on how to manage that.
That's a very difficult problem. We live in an urban environment. We have freeways and roads, and there are land uses, especially within that public or that freeway right of way, where we do collect runoff. That's going to be difficult to control, if you will, because we have no control over what, or over MDOT or over who drives through our city. Really, that turns back to more of an education aspect where it's vehicle maintenance, it's car maintenance, that kind of thing. It's difficult, especially because we do have that freeway interchange right kind of at the headwaters, if you will, of this drainage.
I think that's it for questions right now. Any other questions coming to anyone? Or does anyone want to put comments into the chat?
One thing I would like to ask, for those of you who have attended the meeting, obviously we don't have a sign-in sheet because this is a virtual meeting. If you would like to be sure to get information about the project in the future, please put your email in the chat box just so we kind of have a running total of it. And oops, I went way too quick. Sorry about that. We do have a website for this project, and I would encourage any of you to go here to this website. It's a2gov.org/Newport Creek. We will be putting recordings of all of our coffee hours. We will add a map. Thank you for that recommendation for the drainage area, and any additional resources, as well as the recommendations that come from this project. So please be sure to go to that website, and we will keep it updated as we get new information. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their time. This was wonderful. Virtual meetings are always difficult, and we all are certainly learning, but I think this was really good discussion and comments. And we look forward to future improvements for this project. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and stay warm.
And I'll leave this open for a minute if people want to add their emails to the chat function.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, no problem.
And if the project team could stay on just for a moment, we'll have a little bit of a project recap. And with that, everyone have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.